Today I wanted to start with a question. Have you ever been lost in the dark? Like, lost. Just, you don't know where you are. You don't know how to get back. I see a yes. Been there, done that, yeah. And you know what? It can be scary. There can be that adrenaline rush that happens to us when that happens. And it doesn't happen to us very often because we have access to light. Light is this welcoming, warm thing. And our society, we have access to that so quickly, so easily. And the Bible writers, they loved to take this concept of light and darkness, and they loved to use that as an illustration, as an opportunity to talk about what it meant to be in a relationship with God and in the light. They compared darkness and light to evil and holiness. Now the Apostle Paul picks up this same picture, and he does this in Ephesians chapter 5, starting at verse 8. I'm going to encourage you to find that in your Bibles, or in your pad, or your phone, or whatever you use to find the verses. And last week we covered chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. In that section, the Apostle Paul was talking about God's family culture and what it looked like to align ourselves with God's family culture. And today, we're going to find out that God has placed a light inside of us, and that light is what transforms us so we can live out God's family culture. And so, we're going to go and read this. So we're at Ephesians chapter 5, starting at verse 8. The Apostle Paul says this, "For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light, for the fruit of the light consists of all goodness, righteousness, and truth, and find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it is said, 'Wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.'" All right, so these words probably don't hold quite the same impact for us as they did for the people in that day. And the reason that we maybe don't see the same impact is because we have such easy access to light that we kind of forget what it's like to be in the dark. For the people of this day, nighttime darkness held them captive. Light was tough to supply. You had to have a fire of some kind going near you in order to have any light once the sun went down. And so they would huddle around a fire, huddle near a little flame, a candlelight of some kind, because going out in the dark when it's dark, that's dangerous. They didn't have easy access like we do today. And so I'm betting that you have a light in every room of your house. I'm betting that you even have a light outside that you can turn on, maybe in the yard or on the outside of the home, where you can see out into the yard. You have headlights on your car in order to drive, and I'm betting you even carry a light with you on your cell phone, so that wherever you go, you can bring up a light and see where you're going. So we don't have that feeling of being stuck in the dark, huddling around some little light, trying to supply enough light to just see where we're going. You know, darkness has a bit of an oppressive power. When it's really dark, it feels like it closes in on you, and like you can feel it encroaching. Now, it's that power, that sense of limitation that the Apostle Paul and the Bible writers in general capitalize on in order to paint a picture of sin. So let's go back to verse 8 where he starts with, "For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord." I think this is an amazing sentence. Think about what he's saying here. I was the dangerous one. I was the oppressive one. I was the one who was, in essence, pushing my darkness on other people. When I did what I wanted, when I lived the way I wanted, I would end up imposing on others. And because of that, I needed light. And so when I accepted Christ, that light came into me. And now the Spirit of God lives in me as a light. Now I have become a lantern. And the light burns inside of me because now I glow with the holiness and the radiant glory of God. If I'm really connected with Jesus, I'm the one who begins to glow. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we really glow? Do we really show off the light? Because there are people who claim to be Christian who don't show light. Or at least at times don't show light. And so we really have to ask ourselves if we are light wherever we go. And then the Apostle Paul says what we should do with this light. Next he says, live as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. So he gives us a list of 3 traits that we live out when the light is radiating inside of us. Now, the original Greek actually says, walk as children of light. And at least in the NIV, they just translated as live, which is really kind of the same thing, except that there's this picture that I have as when we walk as children of light, there's this picture of wherever I'm walking, I end up being light for others if I'm really living the light that God wants inside of me. I become a radiant sense of glory and holiness and joy and peace wherever I walk. Isn't that beautiful? You become the light where other people find hope, where other people find joy. And you never need to turn on a light because you are the light. You can navigate through the darkness without tripping and falling, banging your shins on the coffee table or stepping on a Lego. For those of you who have children with Legos, Legos are the awful. Wow. Yes. And as the Apostle Paul says here, that the light offers a fruit. Now, when you see the word fruit in the Bible, you can substitute the word byproduct or side effect. In other words, when the light is in you, there is a natural side effect of that light. And he says there are 3 aspects of it. There's goodness, there's righteousness, and there's truth. And I looked at those and I said, well, that's all 3 the same thing. And I looked up the Greek words, and in some ways, yeah, it is all the same thing, but in the Greek words actually have these subtle additional meanings that are really hard for us to capture in the English. And so let's look at those 3 side effects. So the first side effect is goodness. Now, we think of goodness as being morally correct, to do the right moral thing. And that's a good start, but the Greek word has another additional meaning to it, and it focuses on the motivation for that goodness. The motivation that it focuses on is a sense of kindness and mercy, that there is a motivation inside of us, or there's an attitude inside of us that is filled with a sense of kindness and mercy for others, and that's why we do what we do. The Bible tells us that God has approached us out of his goodness, out of his sense of love and joy and peace for us. He is a God full of mercy. And goodness is when I joyfully overflow with generosity because there's this inner kindness and mercy that I have for others. And so when the light transforms me, I'm motivated by kindness and mercy. And then he says the second aspect is righteousness. And the second side effect of light is more than just morality, because we would oftentimes think of morality as righteousness. But this word, it focuses on right actions because I am fully aligned with God, with what he sees as good and right. Have you seen a team of people who are at work and they don't even have to tell each other what to do next because they have like this inner connection where they know what the other person is going to do? And maybe a basketball team or a football team, and they read each other so well that without words, they position themselves perfectly to pull off the play because they know each other. And this is the picture of righteousness, that we know God so well that we just automatically position ourselves in alignment with where he's going and what he's doing. Then that is the picture of righteousness. And the third aspect is truth. That's a side effect. And again, when we think of truth, we think of having the right theology and having the right actions and knowing what is good versus being deceived. And there are several words that the Apostle Paul could have used for the word that we translated as truth, but this version of the word emphasizes truth as thinking and acting with this high level of excellence, where our minds have this sense of purity and this sense of living at the peak of possibility. You know, when I read this word, I thought of Jim. Jim lived with this high level of morality, not because he should, just because he was aligned with God, right? And when the light is inside me and transforms me, it purifies my mind to think only of what is excellent. So what's the full effect of the light? Well, the light unleashes generosity inside me because I'm motivated by kindness, and the light means that I have this complete unity with God where I'm thinking like he's thinking, and that light leads me to have this absolute integrity. And then the Apostle Paul says, find out what pleases the Lord. Do you know what pleases the Lord? Have you figured out what it is that he wants every moment of every day? There have been times when I thought I was aligning myself with God, doing exactly what he wanted, and later as I look back, I go like, I think I missed the mark on that. I think Jesus would have done that different if he was here. And sometimes we just assume that we have ourselves aligned with God. Maybe even like a child who is trying to please their parent but just misses the mark. This would be an example. Like, what do you do with that? Here's a love note to Dad. But it kind of misses the mark, doesn't it? They say it's the thought that counts, right? Yeah. And sometimes I think we as Christians are trying to please our Father and we miss the mark. Why? Because we aren't Holy Spirit led. We aren't stopping to really ask Jesus, how do you want me to act in this moment? We're taking the morality and the thoughts that we have on what is good and right, and we are just running off and doing it ourselves without stopping to connect with Jesus. Now, the one thing that we can be certain that does please God is this. The Apostle Paul says, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. And since we are light, because God has planted his light inside of us, how can we produce darkness? How is that possible? It shouldn't be possible, but rather we should expose what is not good. The word expose in the Greek means to point it out as wrong, to announce it as wrong. Now picture it this way. When you want to look at something to really see if it's of quality and see if it measures up, a lot of times we'll bring it into a bright light to be able to really see it clearly. And the same is true spiritually. The way we expose wrong thinking is to have the light shine brightly upon it and to really connect with God. And so there's this spiritual principle that we can live by, and the spiritual principle is that if we want to destroy the deeds of darkness in our lives, we need to expose them to the light. We need to be taking all of life's situations and bringing them back to Jesus and talking to him about it, because sometimes we run ahead of God thinking that we know what he wants us to do and find out later that we did it wrong. And I want to stop here and make something really clear, that I'm not telling you to work hard to be good. We as Christians sometimes work really hard to be good. We emphasize this whole thing of, I am going to really be good this week. I'm going to follow God. I'm going to do everything perfect. And we become so focused on trying to do what's good that we aren't really going back to the light, because the Apostle Paul, throughout the entire book of Ephesians, makes it clear that we are transformed by, the transformation does not come through our effort. The transformation comes through the light. And it's when we are filled with light, when we are filled with the Spirit, when we are connected with him, that is the only way for that transformation to happen. And that's why we need to let God's truth expose what's evil in our own lives. And then the Apostle Paul says this next. He says, it is shameful to even mention what the disobedient do in secret. Now, I found this statement odd, and here's why. In verse 11, the Apostle Paul tells us to expose the fruitless deeds of darkness, but now he says it's shameful to even mention what the disobedient do. And we go like, wait a minute, am I supposed to expose the deeds of darkness and talk about it? Or is it shameful to even mention it? Like, which do you want me to do? And here's the interesting thing. I went to, I think, 5 different commentaries, and none of them said a word about this contrast. And I was like, And I looked through the Greek and looked up that the word that is translated as shameful. And here's what I think the Apostle Paul is saying. I think he's saying it is embarrassing to even mention what the disobedient do in secret. That some of the things that people do, we don't want to talk about it because it's just embarrassing. And then you start talking about the things that I do. You know, when I go like, now I have to admit when I've made a mistake, that's where it really gets embarrassing, right? That's where we definitely want to hide it. But it is important for us to expose it. Because when we expose it to the light, we go back to our spiritual principle where when we expose things to the light, they just fade, they die. Our sin grows in the darkness. And when we hide it and cover it, it grows and it multiplies and it takes over our lives. And that's why we should expose the deeds of darkness. And this is what the Apostle Paul says, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes light. So when we shine the light in those areas of our lives and in the lives of the people around us, when we hold up the light, what we begin to see is that those dark things actually become light too. Because we get set free and there's joy in that, and begin to reflect the love and the joy and the peace of Jesus to others. It's that personal connection with Jesus that plants that light inside of us. And when the Apostle Paul says everything that is illuminated becomes light, I think of, for instance, Peggy and I sometimes are sitting in the backyard in the evening and it gets dark and we're talking and the moon comes out and the moon is so bright that we say that the moon is shining, and technically the moon isn't shining at all. The moon is simply reflecting the light of the sun. And so when something is illuminated, it becomes light because it begins to reflect the light to us and others. And so as we wrap this up, the question that I have for myself and for all of us as a church is, am I light? Do I walk around being light to other people? Do people look at me and go like, wow, that's really something? Do they see Jesus in me? Am I a lantern? And do I expose the things of darkness? It was a time when I was actually still in seminary. It was a summer, and I had to do a summer internship. I ended up at a little church just north of Mille Lacs. If you know Minnesota, almost in the center of the state is this big, big lake. And there was a church just north of Mille Lacs that asked me to do an internship with them. And so I went up there, and they had arranged with a family who was going to be away from their home for the summer to allow me to use their home. So I had this whole house to myself. And it was almost like being on vacation up there north of Mille Lacs in the woods. It was this cool little house and almost completely surrounded by woods. And the coolest part of it was that this guy had like this big shop. And so in the evenings, I would go out there and tinker on projects, and I fly radio control airplanes, and was working on it one night when all of a sudden I looked at my watch and I realized it's midnight. And I'm like, oh, I better get to bed because got to get to work tomorrow. And so I turn out the lights in the shop, and the shop was, I'm going to say 20 yards away from the house. And so I back out, and he always padlocked the door, so I pulled the door shut, I clicked the padlock, spun around, and started walking. And I bet I was 4 or 5 steps away from the shop when I realized it was dark. And I mean, really dark. And when I realized how dark it was, I stopped. And I had to test it, It was really dark. Couldn't see a hand in front of my face. And I looked up at the sky, not a star. No moon, nothing. I looked on the horizon. Was there a house light somewhere where I could somehow position myself and be able to move? And there was not a single light anywhere. So I'm standing there and I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I walk forwards, will I walk past the house and out into the woods? And the craziest things go off in your head at those moments. Like, I remember them talking a lot about, there's a lot of bears around this year. I'm thinking, oh great, I get to be a late night snack. And I thought, if I spin around and walk back to the shop, am I going to spin a full 180? Am I going to get back? And so I'm standing there trying to think to myself what I'm going to do. And I don't know how long I stood there. It may not have been long, but I'm standing there going okay, do I just sit here and wait till morning? Do I actually walk for a ways and see if I can find the house? Or what am I going to do? And then off in the distance, I could hear the hum of car tires on an asphalt road. And I knew that about 30 yards away from the house, there was this road that went past. And I waited, and the hum got louder. And I'm like, okay, get ready. That car went past at about 55 miles an hour. And I made a mad dash. The amount of light and the amount of time that I had light, probably a few seconds. But in those few seconds, I was able to get onto the porch and get my hand on the doorknob. Without that car, I'd probably still be standing out there today. And here's my thought. The person who drove by that day, they were just doing life, just doing what they were doing. Chances are I was far enough off on the side that they never saw that I was even in the yard. But because that person was a light at that moment, I was able to get to the house safely. We go through life and we're busy and focused on doing our own thing. But when we truly walk as light, if we are really light, we give others the opportunity to find light too. And there are times, I'm convinced, when we're doing life and we go past people and we affect their lives immensely and they don't even realize it. And we don't even realize what we're doing. But if we can really see ourselves as light and live it for others, we offer people hope who are lost in their own front yard because they're standing in this darkness, this hopelessness, this despair, and they don't know what to do in that moment. There are times when being the light means you have to stop and actually connect with that person and encourage that person. Sometimes it's just walking past. But here's what I'm asking you to consider. I'm asking you to consider, like, really being a light for others. That instead of just being busy and running through life, that we stop and ask ourselves, are there little ways that I can encourage other people, where I can bring hope to someone who's desperate in that moment? This church has a mission, and the mission says that we're here to invite the discouraged into our joyous fellowship with God. Do we have a joyous fellowship with God? Do we radiate that? Do we do it just on Sunday morning, or is that all week long? How can we do that better? How can we really invite people into a joyous fellowship with God? Well, one possible way is for us to actually invite people to church. We're sometimes reluctant to do that, aren't we? Where we're like, I don't know. Starting September 19th, we're intentionally adjusting some of the things that we're doing on Sunday morning, so that when you invite someone, they have this experience where they join us and can enjoy this connection that we have with God. You'll see a few changes in how I present material on Sunday morning. And my prayer is that we as a church really seek to live this mission. That we are an inviting place. Not just that we invite people to come, but once they're here, to love people and meet people. You know what? It's really easy as a church. This is a temptation that we all have, is that when we walk through the doors, we're so excited about seeing our friends that we don't see anyone new. We don't even notice them. Or if we notice them, we go like, oh, that's uncomfortable for me to go meet them. Well, yeah, it's uncomfortable for them to be here. And are we going to go out of our way to make them comfortable, or are we going to go out of the way to make ourselves comfortable? If we're going to be light, then we're going to put others first. And that's the type of church we want to be. We want to be the type of church where the light of Jesus has filled us so that we can be light to others.